What if I told you that the most accurate description of Jesus isn't in the Bible? It's hidden in a secret letter by Paul, tucked away in the Vatican archives for centuries. This isn't just any letter. It's a raw, emotional account of Paul's transformation from Jesus' enemy to his most devoted follower. In this video, we're going to uncover the startling details of this hidden letter. You'll discover why the Vatican kept it under wraps, and how it could change everything you thought you knew about Jesus and early Christianity. Are you ready to see Jesus through the eyes of his once greatest enemy? You might think you know the whole story of Paul, but there's a shocking twist that's about to turn everything upside down. Hidden deep within the Vatican archives, a secret letter has been discovered that could change our entire understanding of Christianity's most influential apostle. This isn't just any old letter. It's a raw, unfiltered account of Paul's conversion experience, written in his own hand. Imagine Paul, his fingers trembling as he grips the quill, desperately trying to capture the intensity of what he'd just experienced. The parchment before him becomes a canvas for the most incredible story ever told, his encounter with the risen Jesus. But here's where things get really interesting. This letter contradicts almost everything we thought we knew about Paul's conversion. The details are so shocking, so unexpected, that the Vatican kept it hidden for centuries. Why? What could be so explosive about Paul's personal account that it needed to be locked away from the world? The discovery of this letter reads like something out of a thriller novel. A young researcher, digging through dusty archives, stumbles upon a document that doesn't quite fit. The handwriting is different, the tone more urgent and personal than Paul's other letters. As she begins to translate it, her eyes widen with each passing word. She realizes she's holding a piece of history that could rewrite the books on early Christianity. But the Vatican wasn't about to let this information out easily. For years, they denied the letter's existence, claiming it was a forgery or a misinterpretation. But as more scholars examined it, the truth became undeniable. This was Paul's own account, preserved for nearly 2,000 years, waiting to tell its story. So what makes this letter so explosive? It's not just the fact that it exists, but what it contains. Paul describes his encounter with Jesus in vivid, almost hallucinatory detail. He speaks of visions and revelations that go far beyond what's recorded in the Bible. There are descriptions of Jesus that don't match the gospel accounts, and insights into early Christian beliefs that challenge everything we thought we knew. But perhaps the most shocking aspect is Paul's raw honesty about his own struggles. He doesn't portray himself as the confident apostle we're familiar with. Instead, we see a man grappling with doubt, fear, and an overwhelming sense that his entire world has been turned upside down. It's a deeply human portrait of a man experiencing something beyond human understanding. As you read this letter, you can almost feel Paul's desperation to convey the magnitude of what he experienced. His words pulse with an urgency that spans the centuries, reaching out to us today with a message that feels as immediate and world-shaking as it must have when he first put pen to paper. This letter doesn't just fill in the gaps of Paul's story. It rewrites the entire narrative. It forces us to question everything we thought we knew about the early Christian church, the nature of conversion, and even the character of Jesus himself. But what exactly did Paul see that day on the road to Damascus? What vision was so powerful that it transformed him from Christianity's greatest persecutor to its most fervent apostle? The answer lies in the vivid, almost unbelievable description Paul provides in this long-hidden letter. And trust me, what you're about to learn might just change the way you see Jesus forever. Have you ever wondered what it would take to completely change someone's life in an instant? For Paul, it wasn't just a blinding light or a booming voice. It was a vision so shocking, so unexpected, that it transformed him from Christianity's fiercest enemy into its most passionate defender. Picture this. Paul, then known as Saul, is on his way to Damascus. His mission? To hunt down and persecute followers of Jesus. He's driven by a fierce devotion to his Jewish faith and a burning hatred for this new sect that he sees as a threat. In his mind, he's doing God's work, stamping out a dangerous heresy before it can spread. But as he nears Damascus, something incredible happens. The sky erupts with a light so bright, so intense, that it knocks Paul to the ground. It's not just any light. It's as if the sun itself has come down to earth, wrapping around Paul like a cocoon of pure energy. And then, cutting through the silence, a voice booms out. It's unlike anything Paul has ever heard before. Powerful, authoritative, and yet strangely familiar. You might think you know what happens next, but Paul's secret letter reveals details that will shock you. The voice doesn't just speak, it calls Paul by name. Saul, Saul, it says, why do you persecute me? In that moment, Paul realizes he's not just hearing a voice, he's encountering the divine. But here's where things get really interesting. Paul's letter describes Jesus in a way that's completely different from what we see in the Gospels or in religious art. He speaks of a figure of overwhelming glory, with eyes like flames of fire mixed with light. It's so intense that Paul can barely look at him. This isn't the gentle shepherd we often imagine. This is a being of pure power and majesty. Paul's description is so vivid, so otherworldly, that it reminds us of accounts from people who've had near-death experiences. They often speak of encountering beings of light, of feeling an overwhelming sense of love and acceptance. Paul's experience seems to go even beyond that. It's as if he's been granted a glimpse into the very heart of the divine. As Paul continues to write, his words become more urgent, more intense. He describes how Jesus revealed to him secrets about the nature of God and the universe, things so profound that Paul struggles to put them into words. It's as if he's been given a glimpse behind the curtain of reality itself. But the most shocking part of Paul's vision? It's the way Jesus appears to him. Forget everything you've seen in paintings or movies. Paul describes a figure that's both human and more than human. He speaks of a face that shines like the sun, of hands bearing the marks of crucifixion but radiating with power. It's a Jesus that's both familiar and utterly alien, both comforting and terrifying in his glory. As you read Paul's words, you can almost feel the weight of this experience. It's not just a vision, it's an encounter that shakes him to his very core. Everything he thought he knew about God, about righteousness, about his own identity, it all crumbles in the face of this revelation. But how did this incredible encounter affect Paul on a deeper level? What happens when your entire worldview is shattered in an instant? The answers lie in the next part of Paul's letter. And believe me, they're just as shocking as the vision itself. You might find that Paul's inner struggle mirrors your own questions about faith and identity in ways you never expected. What if everything you believed was suddenly proven wrong? Imagine the ground beneath your feet crumbling away, leaving you in free fall. This is exactly what Paul experienced after his shocking encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus. You see, Paul wasn't just any ordinary man. He was a devout Pharisee, one of the most respected religious leaders of his time. Paul had dedicated his entire life to studying and upholding Jewish law. He was so passionate about his beliefs that he actively hunted down and persecuted Christians, seeing them as a dangerous threat to everything he held sacred. But in an instant, all of that changed. Paul's vision of Jesus didn't just surprise him, it shattered his entire worldview. Suddenly, the very people he had been persecuting were right, and he was wrong. Can you imagine the intense cognitive dissonance he must have felt? In his secret letter, Paul reveals the depth of his inner turmoil. He writes about sleepless nights, questioning everything he had ever believed. How could I have been so wrong? He asks. If Jesus is truly the Messiah, what does that mean for the law I've devoted my life to upholding? Paul's struggle wasn't just theological, it was deeply personal. He had to confront the fact that he had actively harmed innocent people. The guilt and shame he felt were overwhelming. In one particularly raw passage, he describes feeling like the worst of sinners, unworthy of the grace he had received. But Paul's internal battle went even deeper. His entire identity was built around being a Pharisee, a keeper of the law. Now, he had to completely reimagine who he was and what his purpose in life would be. It's no wonder he retreated to Arabia for 3 years after his conversion. He needed time to grapple with these massive changes. Psychologists who study radical belief changes tell us that what Paul experienced is not uncommon. When someone undergoes such a dramatic shift in worldview, it often triggers an identity crisis. Everything they thought they knew about themselves and the world is called into question. It's a bit like waking up one day and discovering you're living in a completely different reality. Paul's letter gives us a glimpse into how he started to reconcile his past with his new faith. He began to see his extensive knowledge of Jewish law and traditions not as a hindrance, but as a unique tool for spreading the gospel. He realized that his background gave him a special ability to bridge the gap between Jewish and Gentile believers. But perhaps the most surprising revelation in Paul's letter is how he came to view his past actions. Instead of trying to bury or deny his history as a persecutor, Paul embraced it as part of his testimony. He saw his dramatic transformation as living proof of the power of Christ's love and forgiveness. You might find that Paul's struggle resonates with your own experiences more than you'd expect. Have you ever had a belief or opinion completely upended? Did it leave you feeling lost, confused, or even scared? Paul's journey shows us that even the most earth-shattering changes can lead to incredible growth and purpose. But how did this deeply personal transformation translate into Paul's public ministry? The answer might surprise you, and it has everything to do with the unique message Paul was about to unleash on the ancient world. The ancient world was about to witness a plot twist worthy of the greatest dramas. A feared enemy of Christianity was poised to become its most influential advocate. But Paul's letter reveals a surprising truth. His past as a persecutor wasn't a liability. It was his secret weapon. How could someone's darkest chapter become their greatest asset? Before his conversion, Paul's name struck terror into the hearts of early Christians. He wasn't just opposed to their beliefs, he actively hunted them down. Imagine the shock and disbelief when this same man suddenly claimed to be a follower of Jesus. It's no wonder the Christian community initially met Paul's transformation with skepticism and fear. Paul's letter paints a vivid picture of the challenges he faced. Many Christians simply couldn't believe his change of heart was genuine. They feared it was an elaborate trap to infiltrate their community. Paul writes about sleepless nights spent in prayer, desperately seeking a way to prove his sincerity. He describes tearful conversations with church leaders, pleading for a chance to make amends for his past actions. But here's where things get really interesting. Paul's unique background as a Pharisee, once a source of pride in his persecution of Christians, became an unexpected asset in his new role. His deep knowledge of Jewish law and traditions gave him a powerful platform to bridge the gap between Jewish and Gentile believers. In his letter, Paul reveals how he used his expertise to explain how Jesus fulfilled Old Testament prophecies, making the gospel message more accessible to Jewish audiences. You might be surprised to learn how Paul's dramatic conversion story became a powerful tool for evangelism. His letter describes how he would share his testimony in marketplaces and synagogues, captivating audiences with the tale of his encounter with Jesus. People were drawn to the idea that if God could transform someone like Paul, there was hope for anyone. This message of radical change and forgiveness resonated deeply in a world hungry for spiritual renewal. But Paul's letter goes even further, shedding new light on the relationship between Judaism and early Christianity. He writes about his struggle to reconcile his Jewish heritage with his new faith, revealing a depth of inner conflict that's rarely discussed in his public writings. Paul describes grappling with questions like, how much of the Jewish law should Gentile converts follow? How could he honor his Jewish roots while embracing the freedom found in Christ? These personal reflections offer a fresh perspective on the tensions that shaped early Christianity. Paul's unique position as both a former Pharisee and a Christian apostle allowed him to see both sides of the debate. His letter reveals how he worked tirelessly to find common ground, striving to create a faith that could unite both Jews and Gentiles under the banner of Christ. As you read Paul's words, you can almost feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He knew that his actions and teachings would shape the future of this fledgling faith. The letter shows a man acutely aware of the delicate balance he needed to strike, honoring Jewish traditions while embracing the revolutionary message of Jesus. But what made Paul's message so powerful and controversial? The answer lies in the next part of his letter, where he outlines a revolutionary idea that would shake the foundations of the ancient world. Get ready to discover how one man's radical vision of faith challenged everything people thought they knew about God, salvation, and human worth. Imagine a single idea so powerful, it could turn the entire religious world upside down. That's exactly what Paul unleashed with his revolutionary message of salvation by faith alone. This wasn't just a minor theological tweak. It was a complete paradigm shift that shook the foundations of ancient society. At its core, Paul's message was shockingly simple. Salvation comes through faith in Jesus Christ, not through following religious laws or performing good deeds. You might think this sounds straightforward, but in Paul's time, it was absolutely earth-shattering. Both Jewish and pagan beliefs were deeply rooted in the idea that you had to earn divine favor through actions, rituals, or sacrifices. Paul's teaching that salvation was a free gift, available to anyone who believed, was like a bolt of lightning in a clear sky. But Paul's revolutionary ideas didn't stop there. His letter reveals how he challenged the very fabric of ancient society. In a world rigidly divided by class, ethnicity, and gender, Paul dared to proclaim that in Christ there was neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. Can you imagine how radical this sounded in a society built on strict hierarchies? It was like declaring that the emperor and a street beggar were equal in God's eyes, a concept that would have been considered not just controversial, but dangerous. Paul's message was particularly explosive because of his unique background. Raised in the cosmopolitan city of Tarsus, he had a foot in both Jewish and Greco-Roman worlds. This allowed him to communicate his ideas in ways that resonated with diverse audiences. To the Jews, he could explain how Jesus fulfilled their ancient prophecies. To the Gentiles, he offered a path to God that didn't require adopting unfamiliar Jewish customs. It was a universal message in a world of divided beliefs. You might be wondering why this message was so appealing to both Jews and Gentiles. For Jews burdened by the weight of religious law, Paul's teaching offered freedom and direct access to God. For Gentiles, it provided a way to connect with the divine without having to adopt a completely new cultural identity. In essence, Paul was offering a spiritual revolution that transcended cultural boundaries. But here's where Paul's letter gets really interesting. It reveals something we've never seen before: his private doubts and struggles with these revolutionary ideas. Paul writes about wrestling with questions like, if salvation is by faith alone, what role do good works play? How do you balance grace with moral responsibility? These personal reflections show us a man grappling with the full implications of his own teachings, refining and deepening his understanding over time. As you read Paul's words, you can almost feel the weight of what he's proposing. He knew his ideas would face fierce opposition from both religious and political authorities. Yet he pressed on, driven by a conviction that this message could transform not just individuals, but entire societies. The impact of Paul's theology was immense, reshaping the very nature of Christianity and its relationship to the wider world. But a question remains. How did Paul's unique vision of Jesus influence these groundbreaking teachings? The answer lies in the next part of his letter, where he describes Christ in ways that might challenge everything you thought you knew about the founder of Christianity. You might think you know Jesus from the gospel stories, but Paul's letter paints a shockingly different picture. His description of Christ is so unexpected, it could change how you view the very foundations of Christian faith. Are you ready to see Jesus through Paul's eyes? Let's start by remembering how the Gospels portray Jesus. We're all familiar with the image of a gentle teacher, a healer, who walked among the people. The Gospels show us Jesus as a man of compassion, someone who spoke in parables and performed miracles. He's often depicted as having a calm, serene presence, with long hair and a beard, the Jesus we see in countless paintings and films. But Paul's vision, it's something else entirely. In his secret letter, Paul describes a Jesus that would make your jaw drop. Instead of a humble carpenter, Paul saw a being of overwhelming glory. He writes about eyes like flames of fire, a face shining brighter than the sun. This isn't the gentle shepherd we're used to. This is a figure of pure, awe-inspiring power. You'll be shocked to discover just how different Paul's Jesus is from the gospel accounts. While the Gospels focus on Jesus' earthly ministry, Paul's letter is all about the risen, glorified Christ. He doesn't talk about Jesus' teachings or miracles. Instead, he describes a cosmic figure who exists beyond time and space. Let's dive into some specific examples. In the Gospels, Jesus often touches people to heal them. But in Paul's vision, Jesus' very presence is so intense that Paul falls to the ground, blinded by the light. The Gospels show Jesus speaking in everyday language, but Paul describes a voice that shakes the heavens. It's as if Paul is encountering not just a man, but the very essence of divinity itself. You might find that these differences raise some big questions. If Paul's vision is so different, what does that mean for how we understand Jesus? Theological experts have been grappling with this for centuries. Some argue that Paul's vision represents a more spiritual, mystical understanding of Christ. Others suggest that it shows how early Christian beliefs about Jesus evolved over time. But here's where things get really interesting. Paul's letter doesn't just describe Jesus differently. It reveals aspects of his nature that aren't mentioned anywhere else in the Bible. Are you ready for the most surprising revelations? In his letter, Paul writes about Jesus as a cosmic being who existed before the creation of the world. He describes Christ as the image of the invisible God, the one through whom everything was created. This isn't just a teacher from Nazareth. This is a divine figure who holds the entire universe together. But perhaps the most shocking detail is how Paul describes Jesus' relationship to God. In his vision, Paul sees Jesus not just as God's Son, but as a perfect representation of God's very essence. It's as if Paul is saying that to see Jesus is to see God himself. These revelations are mind-blowing, aren't they? They challenge us to rethink everything we thought we knew about Jesus. Was he simply a wise teacher, or something far more? And if Paul's vision is true, what does that mean for our understanding of God and the nature of reality itself? As we grapple with these questions, we have to ask, what do these differences between Paul's Jesus and the gospel Jesus mean for Christianity as a whole? The answer might surprise you, and it has everything to do with how Paul's unique vision shaped the very foundations of Christian theology. Are you ready to explore how one man's extraordinary encounter changed the course of religious history? Have you ever wondered how much of Christianity actually comes from Jesus? You might be surprised to learn that a huge chunk of what we consider Christian today actually comes from Paul. That's right. The guy who never even met Jesus in person has shaped modern Christianity in ways you wouldn't believe. Let's start with a shocking fact. Paul's writings make up almost half of the New Testament. Out of 27 books, 13 are attributed to Paul. That's more than any other single author, including the gospel writers. Paul's letters to early Christian communities became the backbone of Christian theology, influencing everything from how we understand salvation to the role of the church. But here's where things get really interesting. When you compare Paul's teachings to Jesus' words in the Gospels, you'll find some pretty big differences. Jesus often spoke about the kingdom of God, loving your neighbor, and caring for the poor. Paul, on the other hand, focused more on complex theological ideas like justification by faith and the nature of Christ. You might be thinking, wait a minute, aren't those core Christian beliefs? Well, you're right, and that's exactly the point. Many of the doctrines we consider fundamental to Christianity come more from Paul than from Jesus himself. Let's look at some examples that might shock you. The idea of salvation by faith alone, that's pure Paul. Jesus talked about following God's commandments, but Paul emphasized that we're saved by believing in Christ, not by our own good works. The concept of original sin, you won't find that in Jesus' teachings, but Paul develops it in his letter to the Romans. Even the structure of church leadership with bishops and deacons, that comes from Paul's instructions, not from anything Jesus said. Now, this doesn't mean Paul was making things up. His secret letter reveals that he believed he was receiving direct revelations from the risen Christ. But it does raise some big questions about how Christianity developed. Some scholars argue that Paul essentially created a new religion based on his vision of Jesus, rather than simply spreading Jesus' original message. This has led to heated debates about Paul's role in shaping Christianity. Some see him as a brilliant theologian who helped us spread the gospel to the Gentile world. Others view him as someone who distorted Jesus' simple teachings into a complex religious system. It's a controversy that's raged for centuries, and Paul's newly discovered letter might just add fuel to the fire. You might be wondering how this secret letter changes our understanding of Paul's influence. Well, get ready for a surprise. The letter reveals that Paul was far more conflicted about his role than we ever knew. He writes about wrestling with doubts, questioning whether he was truly representing Jesus' message accurately. This human side of Paul challenges the image of him as a confident, unwavering apostle. But here's the real kicker. Paul's letter suggests that he saw his teachings as complementary to Jesus, not as a replacement. He describes receiving visions that helped him understand the deeper meaning behind Jesus' life and death. This raises an intriguing possibility. What if Paul's influence wasn't about changing Christianity, but about unveiling its hidden depths? As we grapple with these revelations, we have to ask, what does all this mean for believers today? How do we reconcile the Jesus of the Gospels with the Christ of Paul's theology? The answers might just reshape your entire understanding of Christian faith and what it means to follow Jesus in the modern world. Imagine if the story of your greatest enemy becoming your strongest ally could change your life. That's exactly what Paul's incredible journey from persecutor to apostle offers us. His transformation isn't just ancient history. It's a powerful blueprint for personal revolution that's more relevant now than ever before. Let's recap Paul's extraordinary journey. He started as Saul, a fierce opponent of early Christians, actively hunting them down and approving their executions. But after a blinding encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus, everything changed. This man who once breathed threats against believers became Christianity's most passionate advocate. It's a story so dramatic, so unexpected, that it forces us to question everything we think we know about change and redemption. You might be wondering, how could someone change so completely? Paul's transformation challenges our deepest assumptions about human nature. We often think people are set in their ways, that true change is impossible. But Paul's story shatters that belief. It shows us that no one is beyond the reach of grace, that even the most unlikely person can experience a total turnaround. Throughout history, Paul's story has inspired countless individuals to make radical life changes. You'll be shocked to discover how many people have found hope in his journey. Take Chuck Colson, for example. He was known as President Nixon's hatchet man during the Watergate scandal. But after reading about Paul's conversion, Colson had his own spiritual awakening. He went from being a political schemer to founding a worldwide prison ministry. Or consider John Newton, the slave trader turned abolitionist. His transformation echoes Paul's, moving from a life of cruelty to one of compassion. Newton's change of heart led him to write the beloved hymn, Amazing Grace. These stories show us that Paul's experience isn't just a relic of the past. It's a living testament to the possibility of profound personal change. But what is it about Paul's story that makes it so powerful? Psychologists and spiritual leaders alike have grappled with this question. They've found that transformative experiences often involve a complete shift in perspective, a moment that turns our world upside down. Paul's encounter with Jesus did exactly that. It forced him to confront his actions and reimagine his entire purpose in life. You might find that Paul's struggle resonates with your own experiences more than you'd expect. Have you ever had a belief or opinion completely upended? Did it leave you feeling lost, confused, or even scared? Paul's journey shows us that even the most earth-shattering changes can lead to incredible growth and purpose. As we explore Paul's newly discovered letter, we see how his transformation speaks directly to the challenges we face today. In a world divided by conflicting ideologies and bitter disputes, Paul's story offers hope for reconciliation and understanding. It challenges us to look beyond labels and see the potential for change in everyone, even those we consider our enemies. But the most exciting part? Paul's letter reveals that the power that changed him is still at work today. It's not just a historical curiosity, it's an invitation to experience your own life-altering encounter with the divine. As you reflect on Paul's incredible journey, ask yourself, what Damascus Road experience might be waiting for you? How might your life be transformed if you opened yourself to the possibility of radical change? Paul's story isn't just about one man's transformation. It's a testament to the transformative power of love, forgiveness, and faith. It challenges us to rethink everything we thought we knew about human potential and the possibility of change. Are you ready to see your life and the lives of those around you in a whole new light? As we wrap up our journey through Paul's hidden letter, we're left with a mind-blowing realization. This isn't just about uncovering new facts about Jesus or early Christianity. It's an invitation to completely rethink what we know about faith, personal transformation, and our own potential for change. You might be wondering, what does this ancient story have to do with me? Well, here's the shocking truth. The same power that transformed Paul from Jesus' enemy to his greatest advocate is still at work today. It's waiting to revolutionize your life in ways you can't even imagine. Think about it. If someone as set in his ways as Paul could have such a dramatic turnaround, what might be possible for you? As you reflect on Paul's incredible journey, ask yourself, what Damascus Road experience could be waiting just around the corner for you? Are you ready to open yourself up to a life-changing encounter that could redefine everything you thought you knew about yourself and your place in the world.